Hello, my name is Alex Fuchsa. I work for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise in the Advanced Development Division. Specifically, my team is looking at cloud-native hardware platforms. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about a common problem we see in hardware architectures. I'm going to describe an architecture that I believe addresses this problem. And then I have a call to action on how the open community can get involved to solve this issue together. When we look at a computer architecture today, we see numerous control planes exist. This makes it very tough on system design, especially for those working with BMCs. In a typical computer, we see PCI interfaces, SM bus interfaces, RBT interfaces, as well as USB, JTAG serial ports, lots of ways to configure and control things. And there's not really a standard amongst all of these. Historically, in computer systems, the host CPU is in charge. When you get root access, you have significant power to configure lots and lots of things. You can download firmware to devices. You can configure network and storage devices. You can do all sorts of configuration devices as soon as you have access to the host processor. The board management controller also has access, albeit on slower interfaces, to take care of commands like temperature polling or other status monitoring. We believe that in a cloud-native computing world, we need to treat all tenants as hostile. Tenants can come and go. Sometimes they're protected by hypervisors. Sometimes we see a shift in the computing industry where people want to run bare metal tenants as well. And we still need a way for an operator or a provider to control all the underlying infrastructure through something like a BMC while treating those tenants as hostile. So we believe the right way to accomplish this is through an isolated control plane. With this isolated control plane, we could have the BMC or potentially a separate isolated control plane controller handling all of the different configuration commands that come in for the underlying options cards. The devices themselves would refuse management commands coming over the host PCIe connection, and they would only accept management commands coming over the ICP, or Isolated Control Plane link. This Isolated Control Plane link could be a variety of different interfaces. We believe two of the leading candidates are PCIe and Ethernet. We would like to work as an industry to figure out which one is the best choice. Some of the things that we think would need to run over this isolated control plane link would be sending large firmware images, sending firewall rules or other NIC configuration commands, large machine images that come in that need to be put onto the storage controller or the underlying storage devices, and some of that constant real-time monitoring that's required for cloud-native hardware architectures. Here's an example of what a cloud-native hardware platform might look like that implements an isolated control plane. You can see this OpenRack v3 server has PCI cards in it, and on the back of those PCI cards, we show a connector that connects this isolated control plane link onto the system board. So what are some of the next steps? We believe as an industry, we need server makers and card manufacturers to work together to kind of define what these new hardware and software interfaces might look like. We think anybody that's interested in producing systems with an isolated control plane or providing option cards that would participate in the isolated control plane would have a real vested interest in participating in some coming forums to discuss these things. We believe from a hardware perspective, we need to look at new connectors or potentially changing pin assignments on existing connectors. And from a software perspective, we think there's a potential for some new data models and APIs for some of the coordination that needs to take place inside of the servers. Some of the possible venues we think that this might be worked in is the DMTF, SNIA, the PCI SIG, or some of the OCP working groups. That's it for today. Appreciate the time and your consideration of the isolated control plane. We'll now take any questions you might have on the subject. Hello, this is Alex. Is there any Hey, thanks everybody for attending. Is there any questions or follow-up comments you guys have about the isolated control plane? Okay, if there's no questions at this time, please feel free to reach out through email. Glad to continue talking about this further offline. My email is just first name dot last name, alex.fuchs@hpe.com. Glad to follow up in more detail. Maybe there's some questions in the chat window.